Hello. Hello, everyone. Hi there. Nice to see the spring weather, is it not? At long last. I mean, not exactly warm, but better than what we were having. I'm Tina Srabotniak. It's a great pleasure to have you here in the Bram and Bluma Appel Salon for this evening in partnership with Soundstreams, let me say, featuring two giants in their respective fields, American composer Steve Reich and Canadian visual artist superstar Michael Snow, in conversation with the CBC's Suk-Yin Lee. So let's get started, and I'm going to start things off by handing things over to our partner in this event, Soundstreams, and their artistic director, Lawrence Cherney.
Thank you, Tina. Again, I'm Lawrence Cherney, Artistic Director of Soundstreams. What a great pleasure it is to see all of you tonight, and we're very pleased to be able to partner with the Toronto Reference Library in this wonderful project. Soundstreams is a leading producer of contemporary music by Canadian and international composers. We were formed 33 years ago. This is actually the third time that we've had the privilege of hosting Steve Reich in Toronto, the first time 2005, 2010, and 2006. And we're looking forward to the next opportunity already. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage someone who will introduce our guests tonight. And she's a person of many talents, a writer, director, a music maker, an actor, and a TV and radio broadcaster and journalist. Would you please welcome Suk-Yin Lee?
I'm going to say a little bit of an introduction to them. So New York City in the late 1960s was known for the gritty wildness of the downtown scene. We've all seen the photographs of the happenings with performers and audiences, and the last of the hippie culture exploring more than just universal peace and love. From New York's downtown emerged groups of artists and onlookers who were open to new ideas and interested in pushing boundaries. And this community gave rise to groundbreaking music and art, but at that time, it was all considered underground. It was the avant-garde. Today, 50 years later, we're still talking about it, and it's become a very important part of our collective history and culture. Tonight, we bring together two luminaries that have shared experiences in the downtown New York scene of the late 1960s, multimedia artist Michael Snow and music composer Steve Reich, are leaders in their fields, partly because of this very early exploration they had as young adults and artists. We're going to speak to them about their shared experiences and how those experiences went on to affect their careers. It's really wonderful to see you, Steve Reich and Michael Snow. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
So, wow, over a half century of art making. We're going to time travel back 50 years. Michael, I wanted to know how the two of you originally met.
Okay. It was a very generous gesture on Steve's part because I received a letter. This is pre-computer. This is 1968 when I was living in New York. And I was in New York. I lived in New York from 62 to about 72. But anyway, I received this letter, and it was from this person who had just seen a film of mine titled Wavelength, and he wrote down his reactions to it, and he wanted to communicate this to me, and also, if possible, to meet. And this was really kind of a fantastic gesture. It was really, and so we did meet. Is that the way it went?
but I remember writing a letter. Actually, I can't remember where I saw Wavelength. Would it have been at the Anthology? If I saw it in '67, anyway, I saw it in
68, I think.
An Anthology?
Because the film was finished in '67. So.
You ever know, I mean, where? Downtown.
You saw it downtown.
Below 14th Street. I saw the movie and I was completely, I was enormously impressed because it was obviously somebody who was thinking along very similar lines to me. And I don't know if did I send you the piece come out, or I think I sent you the record, or asked you to get it, or
No,
what?
after we met, you introduced yourself and told me that you were a composer.
Yeah.
And you gave me, I guess it must have been an LP or
Yeah, it was an LP.
Maybe it was a quarter-inch tape.
No, it was the LP.
Come out to show
Come out to show them.
your vocal piece, which knocked me out.
That we were
And,
both on the floor.
It really was wonderful. And then it turned out that
Michael, can you hold this?
Yes,
Your
okay.
mic, so, yeah, good.
it's not working?
Yeah,
Okay.
so this will be better.
Okay. Well,
So then he sent you an LP of his.
no, the thing was, we agreed to meet, and it turned out that his studio was on Duane, a few blocks away from my studio, which was on 300 Canal Street, where and it so happens I had shot Wavelength. And so for the next year or two, I was able to drop in occasionally and hear rehearsals. And I heard the beginning of the first attempts to put together drumming. And which brings me to another, that was quite fantastic. I met Russell Hartenberger then. And so there was a bit of crisscrossing, but I was living in New York. And,
Right.
but somewhere in there, you decided to go to Africa to study.
That was no, you're right. It was
70
exactly in that period of time,
71 or
right.
something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. 1970.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, you saw Wavelength downtown somewhere, and you were immediately struck to correspond with him after you had I've seen the letter myself, and it's like a very vivid expression of how you took in his work. What was it that struck you about Wavelength, Steve?
Well, that's a long, I'll try to make it short, and then later I'll make it longer, and then finally I'll make it real longer, and then the evening will be over. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, Wavelength, that's a Zoom in a room. And, on some level, it's a Zoom in a room, but that's not very interesting. It was a very slow-moving film, and you were inside some studio, obviously, and you could see the far wall and sort of see some furniture and maybe a little photo and some windows. And, but what happened is that every once in a while, you'd see yellow or green or blue, and the film would kind of fade. And I found out later when I asked him that he had purposely used out-of-date film stock. Those of you who are old enough remember film. And when film got old, it got funky. And he loved it that way. So there was, I mean, the key to it was that it was a very systematic work with all kinds of non-systematic intrusions allowed to enter, which was informative to me because I was working on systematic work too. And so that in itself was interesting, but the irregularities allowed were really a revelation and something I think I learned a great deal from. And I probably had an effect on music for 18 musicians.
What about the sound?
Michael's always about the sound. He's like, what about the sound?
Actually, he's right. There's an when it starts off. There's an oscillator, just a hum. It's electronically generated sound, and you notice it, and you realize there's no sync sound. There's no sound of the room at the beginning.
Yeah.
There's just this oscillator. So you're looking at something real, but you're hearing something electronic. So you're kind of distanced from the reality you're looking at. And then slowly you realize the oscillator is rising, but it's rising. If you don't pay attention to it, it isn't. If hey, didn't that go up? Oh, yeah, it did, just a little teeny bit. Meanwhile, you're looking at the room for like, and as I say, these little, it's night, and then it's day, because you see the light, because he's shooting out 2 windows on Canal Street, and you also see traffic sometimes going by. And it goes on like that for quite a while, and walks in, turns on the radio, and it's Strawberry Fields Forever. At that point, I said, all right, we're somewhere else. and that's sync sound. You're in the room. The Beatles are in the room. The oscillator, I don't remember if the oscillator is still there or not. And then Amy Taubman picks up the phone and says, Amy, there's someone in here and they're dead. And you're in the middle of a murder mystery.
Yeah, very Hollywood.
You say, wait a minute, I came here for an experimental film. So, and then after a while, I don't know how long, that all goes away. And you're back with the oscillator, which has gone up, which has gone higher. And then at this point, I'm going to give the whole thing away. Why don't
Giving
you
away
shut me
so
up and
many
we'll go back?
spoilers. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're playing with perception. You find a kindred spirit here. And later that year, it's still 1968, we see Michael, as well as a few more friends of yours, composer James Tenney, sculptor Richard Serra, artist Bruce Nauman, and you're all at the Whitney Museum performing one of your works, Pendulum Music. We're going to take a look at a photograph of you fellas. Sadly, you can't see it because the screen is in front of you. Yeah. But there you are as young guys, you know, with things poised, ready to go. It's a still image, so there's no movement. Can you tell me any recollections? What do you recall? What do you remember from that day and that particular performance?
That was at the Whitney Museum on the 4th floor, and it's, let's see, Richard Serra and James Tenney and Michael Snow and Bruce Nauman, and I'm in the middle, sort of with my head looking at the dials. And what's going to happen is we're going to count, or I'm going to count out 1, 2, 3, 4, release, and they all just let go of their pendulums, and they swing, whoop, whoop, because the way it's set up is that the volume is turned up just enough so that when the microphone is over here, you don't hear anything. But as it approaches the speaker, it begins to squeal feedback. You know what feedback is. So you get whoop, whoop, and there's 4 of them. So they form patterns which are not determined, which are determined by the physics of.
It's an interesting piece in the context of all your other pieces because most of your work is very determined. And it has to be played exactly right, whereas pendulum music has chance in it because the four people just let the microphones go and they go at their own speeds. So every performance of it is going to be a little bit different, whereas drumming has to be played right.
Well, there's this variation. But not like pendulum music, you're absolutely right.
You have a very good memory, Michael. Do you remember what it was like that day in terms of setting up, who was there? What do you recall about that day?
Well, I was really honored to be asked because I thought very highly of the
other pendulum swingers.
The other swingers.
60 swingers. Pendulum swingers. Can you tell me about your relationship with these fellows who you are performing with in this day?
Yeah, sure. Well, Richard Serra actually was our neighbor. In those days, it was called the Washington Market. It was Lower Manhattan, and it was called Washington Market because between, I don't know, about 2 or 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., trucks would come down and load up with vegetables, right across the street from where I lived, right across the street from where Richard Serra lived, and then distribute them throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. And then by 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, it was just empty, vacant lots. Shortly, years that followed, the World Trade Center was built in that few blocks from there. And if you go down there now, Martin Scorsese's got a place. When I was there, I was paying $65 a month. And you know what? Martin Scorsese's paying more. And now it's Tribeca, which is world famous and the most expensive real estate in Manhattan. But when Michael, who was on Chambers Street, because I used to eat a lot of free dinners at your house in those days, right? And I lived on Duane, and Richard Serra was on Greenwich Street. So it was like here is Richard, and here am I, and over there is Michael. And there weren't too many other people that Soho was about 10, 15 blocks north of us. So we were kind of in no man's land at the time. And
But there were some interesting people living on Chambers Street at that time.
Ken Jacobs.
Roswell Rudd,
yeah.
great trombone player, and Cecil Taylor.
Did Cecil Taylor live
pianist.
down there?
Yeah, and Ken Jacobs,
I know Ken, yeah.
fantastic
So
filmmaker.
would you guys run into each other day to day in that neighborhood, seeing one another?
The people that I just mentioned, I knew quite well, yes.
Yeah. Now, I understand as well as Richard Serra, one of the swingers, he had a indie moving company that you guys helped out.
No,
Is that
this
right?
getting-
Is
no,
that
this is-
right?
This is called, you ever play telephone, you know?
Oh, is this Broken Phone?
This is called, no, Phil Glass and I had a moving company for about a month or two called Chelsea Light Moving. Only all we got was smelly couches on the 5th floor walk up on the Lower East Side, so we dissolved the company.
Phil Glass and Richard Serra worked as two underground plumbers.
Oh,
too.
they were plumbers.
Yeah, well, Phil did it.
I
yeah.
had them do some work before I knew who they were, actually, in the sense of what
Plumbing.
They were great artists, as well as plumbers. So this was when living in lofts was illegal,
Right.
and they were illegal plumbers.
We were illegal livers.
I hope there's no danger in my saying that. It's quite
So
a
you
long time ago.
were movers, you were plumbers. You were making money to make your work. What was one of your favorite things about this particular time period, this downtown scene?
Well, just getting my work done and getting to have contact with people who were of a similar mind and who were getting their work done and whose work interested me to, to drop in to see what Michael was up to, and that was extremely energizing to have that kind of feedback.
That's great. Michael, what
Could
about
I,
you?
yeah, sorry. Could I go back to just before you saw Wavelength?
Right?
Are you able to hear Michael? Okay, so okay. So Michael, do you mind if I mic you? Because you're like this,
Sorry.
and then they can't hear you, and they want to hear you. Okay, so go ahead. So you wanted to go back.
Now I have to say something interesting.
You do.
We'll see if this is interesting or not. The thing is, before you came to New York, at least on this particular, when you saw Wavelength, you had been in San Francisco, and you had done the soundtracks for a couple of experimental films.
Yeah.
One called Odem Watermelons
Yeah, I'd rather forget
by
that.
Robert Nelson.
Yeah.
And so that you had an introduction to experimental film.
I was aware of it, but curiously, in the series, is that they never showed your films.
So is that why you went to see Wavelength, or had you heard about it or something like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was interested. There was no video hadn't quite emerged. So avant-garde film was already 20, 30 years. I mean, there was a real tradition of that in America, which you were actually near the end of, in a sense, because video hit
Yeah.
during your period.
Yeah, and San Francisco is kind of venerable in that tradition of
Yes,
being a-
yes.
so, yeah.
There was nothing I saw while in San Francisco that I have any memory of or any interest in. It was a complete blank. I went there and I don't remember anything.
But he does remember wavelengths.
No, it's true. I mean, it was like, that was all kind of weird, people being weird. And people being weird doesn't interest me at all. Never did. I like something that's really about something. And this was about a Zoom in a room. And an oscillator and a murder mystery and
Murder
Strawberry
mystery.
Fields.
Fantastic.
Excuse me?
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic? Yes, it was. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Michael, I mean, the thing is, you moved to New York City at that time with your late ex-wife, the very brilliant artist Joyce Whelan. You were two young Canucks from Toronto in the Big Apple.
Middle-aged.
Okay, were you middle? You looked so young back then.
She was young.
You look pretty young here too. But okay, younger. What was the biggest challenge for you? What was one of the biggest differences living in Toronto and then boom, jettisoning yourself to New York City?
Well, there were
Close?
There were quite a few challenges, but the main thing that was interesting was that she and I met. We were both working for a film company in Toronto, learning how to do animation, and we both made our own films then. George Dunning, who later directed the Beatles film, The Yellow Submarine, was the director of that company. And he told some of the people that were learning how to do animation on the job, which is me and Joyce, that we could also make our own films if the animation camera and cameraman were free on certain occasions, or on that, when you wanted them. So I made my first film without knowing about, apart from the films that George Dunning had made and Norman McLaren had made at the Film Board. I didn't know about experimental film as an entity at all. I made my first film, which is a cutout animation film called A to Z at that time. So anyway, when Joyce and I came to New York, we really didn't know that there was an active experimental film world. I mean, we knew about the art world, to say the least, but and it was an interesting situation because there's a lot of wonderful work being done, a lot of which was helped by the activities of Jonas Mekas, who wrote about these films in the Village Voice and organized screenings and all that kind of stuff. But it was strangely independent from the art world. And it's an interesting thing because there was no money. There was no money for making films, and there was no money to be made from them. So it had a certain purity, and but against that, I mean, that purity was against what was happening in the art world, which was quite sensational. This is post the abstract expressionists and with new artists like Oldenburg and so forth. There was a lot of money, and so anyway, the thing that was the most important for Joyce and I was the discovery of this scene, where when we started to go regularly and we met other people. That's where I met Richard Foreman and Amy and Ken Jacobs and Hollis Frampton. And so that was a fantastic aspect of going there.
Fantastic, wow. It's interesting to hear that sort of, because animation is so huge in Canada, and how you were able to start from that and go to New York City and then have it grow in so many other ways. We're going to take a look at a video, and this is of your work, Pendulum Music. This is on the screen here. And Kyle, can you play that for us, please? Thank you.
What video?
We're looking right now at, and it's a performance of Pendulum Music.
Oh.
And so that people can actually see it in motion. And it's a more recent one. It's not from 1968, but it is more recent so that people can see what is going on there. It's fantastic. So this is, you refer to this as an audio structure. It's very striking sonic invention. And it captures some of your defining qualities. There's repetition, there's movement, there's simplicity, there's transformation. Steve, can you recall a particular seminal early inspiration that made you kind of look at the world in this manner?
Oh, sure. I was in Boulder, Colorado, in the summer of 1968, I think, and I was invited by William T. Wiley, American artist, to help him put on an event at the university, and I happened to be visiting someone in Taos, New Mexico, so why not? And when I got up there, who should show up but Bruce Nauman? And Bruce Nauman was a student of Bill Wiley's while he was on the West Coast. Also, Bruce is originally from the Midwest. He was studying on the West Coast, and Bill was his teacher. And he was on his way cross country to, I think, stay in Roy Lichtenstein's house. A lot of big, many people here. And it turned out that Bruce had heard Come Out and was very taken by it. And so he was very pleased to meet me. And I'm standing there, the New Yorker, and I'm next to Bill Wiley, who's a real, native Californian, and Bruce, who I thought was, actually he's from the, so I kind of, and there was this tape recorder on the floor, Volensek cheap tape recorder, had a little microphone with a 6-foot cable on it, and I kind of felt, well, I'm going to lasso my microphone and become a Westerner like everybody else out here. And by chance, because while I was doing this, the tape recorder was on, and the mic was live, it started to go whoop, 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 and I looked at that and said, huh. And I don't know exactly, how many further there had to be to finally come up with the piece, but Bill and I did this piece which he titled Over Evident Falls, and which was done with black light and ivory flakes falling from the ceiling on a bag, and tied to a swing, and on either side of the swing seat were 2 mics, which passed by 2 tape recorders and went boop, boop, while this is going on. So that was the beginning of it. Then later I began to realize that it was a piece that could be done, independently of that circumstance, and
Wow.
that led to
So
that
just
performance.
a moment where you're just hanging out and you just notice.
Hanging out, trying to be a Westerner, yeah.
You're wanting to be a cowboy. Okay, so, you are considered one of the founders of what is called minimalism, along with Lamont Young, Terry Riley, and Philip Glass. Curious, how do you feel about that term, minimalism?
That's not my job.
It's not your job. Yeah.
I just work here.
You're just a workman.
Excuse me?
You're a workman. So you don't have
That's
any.
correct. I'm a workman.
Yeah. So it's more or less a genre that is come up by people. Who
Well, look, I'm not completely naive. And throughout musical history, people who lived in certain periods and who kind of know each other and work. So we have, Debussy and Ravel and Satie, who are wildly different people, being called impressionists because there's some je ne sais quoi about hearing them and looking at Monet haystacks, and there is, And there's good reason for that. And there's good reason for, people looking at Michael's early work, certainly, and some of his sculptures, and listening to what I did early on and Glass's stuff, and other people's work at the time, and certainly Sol LeWitt and Frank Stella, and even I think that Richard Serra was already pushing past that, but both Richard and Bruce certainly were influenced by it, and saying, oh, this is minimal art. This is, actually, it was an Englishman, Michael Nyman, who made up the term.
Yeah, minimal or minimalist does apply to some of your things. Clapping, for example, clapping music, and the two claves.
5.
Yeah, okay. You know, on the other hand, music for 18 musicians is so complex that it'd be silly to call it it's maximal.
Maximalist.
With friends like this?
Minimalist versus maximalist, very interesting. Michael, what about you? Like the process of reduction. I mean, where does reduction come in terms of your own work? Let's talk about wavelength. I mean, it is a zoom in across the room.
Yes.
Why not zoom out?
Hey, I never thought of that.
You're saying the entire film wavelength does what it does, and then it zooms out?
No. What if you made a movie in another quantum reality, also wavelength, but as opposed to going across the room into, you know, the journey into the waves, you started in the waves and went out into the larger world. Like why did you choose to zoom in rather than what's more interesting than zooming in than zooming out? Like the micro versus the macro.
That's pretty impossible to answer.
All right. Moving right along. So I want to talk about now your music. So we hear a little bit of CCMC, and there's lots going on. There's a lot of stuff happening. Michael, how important is listening in terms of when you're making improvisational music? How important is the active listening to others play?
Well, obviously it is important, but you can wave in and out of your attention when you're improvising, and that's part of the sort of psychology of it. I mean, sometimes you can ignore the rest of them, and interesting things will happen. So it seems like on the surface of it, paying attention would be the most important thing, but sometimes it actually isn't. If you just ignore them and let them do what they're doing, and then come in when you feel like it.
Yeah.
So, you know, so there are a lot of different sort of psychological aspects to how you're going to treat the rest of the music and come in or out from it.
When you make a choice to either
Yes,
listen
I mean,
or...
you might make a choice of some kind without it being completely formulated, and that you make a kind of gestalt out of what's happening, and you want it to go in a certain direction, and so you wait until you can put that note or make that gesture, which will help it go in that direction. So it's a kind of instant composition in some ways.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What about in your composition, Steve? How important is it when you're playing the composition to be listening to others who are also playing with you?
Essential.
Essential.
I don't know any music that's played by anyone anywhere where that isn't essential, and if it isn't essential, they're not playing well.
Yeah, so very different kinds of.
You were playing a Beethoven string quartet, and you'd be doing exactly that. You'd screw it up.
What does it feel like to play the music? So last night I was listening to you play an excerpt.
Drumming part 1.
Yeah, and of clapping, and you had everybody sort of.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the playing. That was Russ teaching everybody certain things to do.
It felt very nice to do, like in that environment. It was a party, and you know, there was tensions. You know, I noticed the audience way far over here, but as soon as we began to clap, there was sort of joy. I felt joy.
Great.
I felt kind of a coming together. But what does it feel like for you? Because that's a different thing. These are your compositions. When you are working with other musicians and you're really working on this piece where it requires listening to one another. What does it feel like for you?
Well, last night I was playing during part one, which I must have played 100 times, but I haven't played it in the last 2 years, and really before that I hadn't played it for almost 8 years. So I was a little bit nervous about how I was going to do, and I've got a little arthritis in both thumbs. So I got together with Russ and Russ Hartenberger and Bob Becker and Gary Kibistad, who are very, very close friends and musicians I've played with for many years, particularly Russ and Bob. So I said, hey, we got to go through this, which we did when no one was around. And it was a little rusty, but I felt, well, I can get through it, and this is a party, so, that's cool. And then when we actually got around to playing it, it was really a good performance. It was really right there. It was really, I thought, wow, gee, I didn't think it'd be that good. And you can rehearse every day and be young and be on top of everything. How many musicians here? All right, then you all know what I'm talking about. And you rehearse and you rehearse and you really got it down. You can go on stage and it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen either emotionally, or you actually play a lot of wrong notes, or who knows what. And on the other hand, last night was kind of a gift, because Russ was up to speed and Bob was up to speed and Gary, but I really felt like, hey, I don't know if I can carry my share, but to my delight, with a minimum of rehearsal, I was able to. So it was very, very gratifying, and I really enjoyed it.
I read many different emotions on people's faces. Russ is incredibly chill, very, very chill, very composed player, until the very end, just because he was doing the cue. So he was like super cool, and then his big eyes opened up, and you just saw a flash of bright blue eyes that kind of was an indication of the end of the piece.
He gives us a cue, yeah.
Yeah, and then there was another moment where there was tension, like people kind of almost not keeping it together. So it feels like
we purposely have to get out. We have to get from one position into unison, and that means just sliding like all over an ice rink, until you get back into unison.
Is there a part of you that must sort of, so you're trying to retain the sort of compositional structure, but is there a part where you just kind of have to let go, sort of be one with this moment?
Well, you're always sort of balancing that. I mean, if you're really uptight about what's going on, you're probably not going to play very well. Mm-hmm. And so I got to that point. I didn't think I'd get to that point last night, but fortunately it worked out.
We're going to take a look at a montage of 3 works that you're going to be playing this Thursday, presenting compositions from various points in your career. There's clapping music from '72, music for 18 musicians, 1976, and Tehillim from 1981. We're going to take a look at it on the screen here.
I was younger and had my hair.
the human voice, clapping hands, there are sounds generated from the human body, breath. You also incorporate various technologies. What have you learned through the process of trying to combine humans and technology?
The first works that Michael heard of mine and the first work of mine that got public attention were these two tape pieces of recordings of people. The first one was of a black Pentecostal preacher preaching about Noah, the end of the world. It was called It's Gonna Rain. And the second one was Come Out, that Michael heard, which is the voice of a kid who was arrested, black kid who was arrested for murder, who did not do it, and was describing opening up a bruise on his leg so that he would be taken from the 28th precinct to the hospital and cleaned up. And he said, I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruise blood come out to show them, ba-dum, ba-da-dum. And the speech melody attracted my ear to say, I want to make a piece out of this. We all, while we're communicating with each other, have speech melody. Sometimes it's very boring and monotonous. I use one example a lot, but it's very simple. If somebody says to you, no, that's one word, right? Somebody says to you, no, that's another word, right? And that speech melody can be a pivotal reality in your life. It can mean a change in something really, from a job to a marriage to to who knows what. So that reality of speech melody, which I'm not the first to observe. Janacek, the Czech composer, wrote a lot about it, which you should read. It's very beautiful. And so I got involved in the same time that Michael was getting involved in learning films. I was fooling around with tape loops. That's when tape was a plastic substance. And you could put it in a metal block and put splicing tape across it, and it would be a circle. And you could put it on a tape recorder and go over and over and over again. And if you do that with human speech, you get not just a repeating, but you begin to hear the music and the meaning become it's hard to tell what takes precedence. And in these pieces that I did, it was equally essential that there be a human source who would say something that you would understand and would have meaning to you, and then that this would become sort of increasingly abstract through having it played against itself, like row, row your boat. Only they start together and slide apart. And the result can be, quote, abstract, but somehow the meaning doesn't get lost, it gets intensified. And that, to me, was really very magnetic. And it even got to some other really first-rate artists around. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I felt, that's great, that's wonderful. What am I going to do? Make tapes the rest of my life? Because people can't do that. Windshield wipers on a bus do that. Railroad bells at a crossing do that. People can't do that. You play over and over. I get. No. Finally, I just said, I'm the second tape recorder. And I made a pattern at the piano, and I sat down, and I gradually got fit, and that became piano phase. So in other words, I moved from something done with a machine, with actually two machines, and felt the necessity of transferring that to human beings playing music, which was probably one of the more important things I've done in my life. And that opened up the floodgates to pieces like drumming and lots of other pieces afterwards.
Very interesting. Well, okay, we're going to open up the questions to the floor in just a sec, but I just wanted to talk about, as you approach your 80th year, and your 90th year, as you approach your 90th year, how would you like your legacy to be perceived?
I'd like people to continue to play my music.
which is happening more and more and more. Yeah, it's beyond you.
Excuse me?
It's beyond you now. It's like out there.
Well, hey, wait a minute now. Don't push me out the room.
Yeah, no. What about you, Michael?
Well, I would like my films to survive, and a number of people are working here and there on archiving them. So work is being done, and it's getting there. So in some form or other, they will continue to be around. You know, even though film will cease to exist, and naturally I would prefer them to be in their original form, but that has turned out to be impossible. So it's just something that I'm not truly working on, but a lot of people have become involved in it, like Anthology Film Archives in New York. Right now they're working on my film back and forth, making a 35 millimeter version of it for archival purposes.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I guess the same thing applies to my work with photography, photographic work. I'd like to try to save it so it can be around a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, fellas. You're not done yet. We have a microphone set up in the room. We're opening it up to the floor. So, okay, there's a fellow there, and he has a question for you.
Yeah, sorry, this is a question for Steve Reich. In 1966, I believe you worked on the soundtrack to Peter Adair's Holy Ghost People.
What?
Holy Ghost People, a film in Appalachia.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't, I didn't work on it. It was a gig.
Yeah, it was a gig. But were you recording the soundtrack then?
Yeah, I came to New York and from having done graduate work in Mills College in San Francisco, in Oakland, with Luciano Berio, came back to New York in 1965 and had to do various things. I mentioned the moving company, and I also, since I knew a little bit about tape, I did some sound recording for independent filmmakers who had some money and could pay me.
Right.
And this was a real weird film. I think the guy's name was Peter Adair?
Peter Adair, yeah.
Yeah,
I know
right.
yeah.
And he said, well, I said, well, what's the gig? He said, well, we're going to go down to Gully Bridge, West Virginia. That's a good beginning, right? Anyway, something, and I said, well, what's happening there? He said, well, we're going to film the Serpent Handlers cult. Mm-hmm. And I paused. And he explained, well, they're going to like throw these snakes around, you know, and they're going to sort of chant and make noises while they do that, and you'll record them. So I said, you know, how much? And I don't remember what it was, but it was, you know, for then it was a lot of money. It was enough to do it. But it was a spooky job. I mean, it was a apprehension in the room, definitely. I felt the people were not people I was used to being with, doing things I wasn't used to seeing happen, and it wasn't in a big hurry to stay there.
Yeah. All right, because my question was for me, I thought because of the timing, there might have been a connection if you had listened to shape singing or American primitive music, American folk music, kind of the condensed rhythms and condensed sound planes, whether there was any influence at all, or just
Zero.
Okay.
I just wanted to get out.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Was this on the West Coast?
No,
No,
this is
West Virginia.
Gully Bridge, West Virginia. I don't know,
Yeah.
look it up somewhere.
Yeah.
You're like, get me
you.
back to New York City.
Excuse me?
Get me back to New York City. Okay,
This was
so
several
the next
miles south.
question.
Hi, hello. Thank you for this. It's great. I have a question that's kind of adjacent to both of you, but starting off talking about kind of downtown New York and film and the avant-garde. I was thinking about Tony Conrad's recent passing away and his work in kind of film and music, and if either of you had any kind of comments on interactions with or kind of thoughts on Conrad's career as both a filmmaker and a musician.
Michael?
You mentioned Tony Conrad. As you know, he just died. Yeah. I met him in the 60s. He was one of the people in Lamont Young's ensemble. And then this is really saying not very much. It's just that I met him and sometimes worked with him, like in Buffalo at the university there. He was part of the film department, and I did sometimes freelance so-called teaching, showing films and stuff like that. So anyway, Tony was a really very, very unique person. He was, anyway, I'm sorry he's gone, but I'm glad he was here.
Absolutely.
But anyway.
And Manny, hi.
Hi.
You have a question?
Yes, I do. Steve, with your earlier work, Come Out and It's Gonna Rain, and the works that came out of this tape loop technique, and which seems to be a sort of precursor to hip-hop music and sampling, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts in regards to the composition style called hip-hop music, and if it relates to for you to your work. And as a follow-up, if you could also comment on jazz and that potential role it might have played in your early work.
As to your first question, the answer is I know almost nothing about it and haven't followed it and can't answer your question. As to jazz, I could go on for a long time, but I'll just focus on John Coltrane, who I started hearing when I was at Juilliard in '58. And I continued listening to him through the middle '60s. And I'd single out a particular LP he made called Africa Brass, I think in 1961, before any of my pieces, before NC, before anything. And the unique thing about Africa Brass is that it was 16, 17 minutes long, and it was all on E. So you know how jazz musicians talk to each other, hey man, what's the changes? E. No. What's the changes? E. E for 17 minutes. And you think, yeah. Thanks a lot. So, you know, how can you do that and make it interesting? Well, the reality as I perceived is that Coltrane's playing soprano and tenor, and sometimes he's playing these gorgeous melodies, and sometimes he's screaming through the instrument. So you've got melodic invention. You've got sounds that sound like whoop, whoop, like elephants coming through the jungle. And it's really Eric Dolphy, another great jazz musician, from whom I stole the idea of using the bass clarinet. He orchestrated these French horn glissandos, which sound like elephants coming through the jungle. So you have melodic invention, you have timbral variety, these funny sounds. And then you have Elvin Jones, who is probably one of the most complex drummers who ever played jazz. And so if you have incredible rhythmic complexity and melodic invention and timbral variety, you can be there for 17 minutes in E, and man, you are glued. You are rooted to the spot. And that's like taking a lesson, a very intense lesson. And I think I wasn't the only one who took it. And I don't know if there'd be something called minimal music without Coltrane's very large contribution to it.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your music.
Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, yes. To give a little bit of a change of pace, I'm curious as to the artistic process that both of you go through, because I'm personally a writer and a visual artist, and I've done some composing, but want you to think about the creative process, how you, in a very concrete way, how do you start working on a piece? What do you do first? What do you do after that, etc.?
You first.
Yeah. You get a break.
I need some help. I think it's such a general question that I can't think of I mean, could perhaps describe working on a particular idea that you say it might be interesting if you put this with this, and if you did that, what would you get? And then you might try that. I can't think of. So personally, I work in a particular area. I decide on a. This gives me a chance to talk about my film Rameau's Nephew by Diderot, thanks to Dennis Young by Wilma Schoen. It's a 4.5-hour film with a long title that's completely built on recorded speech. It's a talkie. And it really is. It's probably the only talkie, because it's completely built on recorded speech and the images of people making recorded speech. So anyway, I made Rameau's Nephew because I became more and more interested in recorded speech, and also the amazing manipulability of film sound, because unlike video, you have two separate things, and the separate soundtrack can be much more manipulated than it ever is, because it's usually naturalistic sound. But so making Rameau's Nephew came about from looking into all the possibilities of manipulating by cutting in all kinds of different ways recorded speech. So that was a general project that started. It took me 3 years to make that film, and all the time the direction had been determined in a general sense, that this was the field of inquiry, so to speak. So is that relevant?
I think that's relevant. I guess sort of
Begin with
what
your
you're saying is
curiosity.
you start with a idea of a general area of inquiry, and then you kind of become more specific.
Some experiments. Do you have anything to add to that, Steve, about?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Thank you. And we have another question.
Hi. So this is for Steve. I'm a percussionist. I've had the pleasure of performing a bunch of your work, Nagoya Marimba's Clapping Music. I recently got to perform drumming in its entirety with Russ in downtown, but I performed Music for 18 about 5 years ago. And it was a real turning point in my life. It was absolutely a remarkable experience for me as a musician. When those maracas kick in, man. But I just remember looking up at that point and seeing my fellow musicians, and it was like this moment of pure ecstasy, like transcendental almost. It was just like this remarkable experience. And I've actually spent some time in Ghana myself. I was studying at the University of Ghana for 5 months, and so I've experienced kind of similar feelings before, just playing music that's very repetitive for long stretches. But there's something about Music for 18 that's just entirely transcendental. So first off, I just wanted to thank you for creating that, because it was a beautiful moment in my life and very meaningful, and subsequently whenever I hear it, it's very important to me. So, but I wanted to ask you, we kind of touched on maybe how you feel when you perform. You were talking about the other night, but I'm wondering if you've ever felt similar experiences performing your music, particular Music for 18, or if not, has there been moments in your life or a particular kind of music that brings about this kind of transcendental, euphoric performing experience for you?
That's a long. So okay. So
I just want to know, if you've
You're asking
had,
about other pieces I like.
yeah.
yeah, how does it feel playing that?
But how do you feel that piece, or if not that piece, is there any other music that just brings about kind of a transformative, euphoric experience for you? Maybe Ghanaian drumming.
Well, I mean, when I was 14 years old, I had never heard in my piano lessons or in my listening any music before Haydn and any music after Wagner. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, come on over to the house, I want you to hear something." So I went, and he played me The Rite of Spring. And my jaw fell.
Yeah.
And the whole world looked different. And I thought, I want to do that. That's the best thing in the world. And about a few weeks later, he said, I want you to do something else. And he played me the Fifth Brandenburg Concerto of Johann Sebastian Bach, the one that's got the unbelievable harpsichord solo, right? And about 2 or 3 weeks after that, another friend of mine who was a better pianist than I was studying jazz said, I don't know. And he played me an old Savoy recording of Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and the drummer Kenny Clark. And we said, we got to form a band. I said, yeah. I said, I'm a drummer. And I stopped studying the keyboard and I started studying percussion with Roland Koloff at the age of 14. And in a sense, it was as if I had lived in a house for 14 years. And someone said, there's one room you haven't seen. And they open the door and I go in the room and I'm still in that room. So that's the best I can.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So my question is for both of you.
Okay, so this is the last question.
Yeah, okay, cool. When you're working with, I feel good about that.
Just, if anyone else is moving toward the mic. These guys have been working hard.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
So
know.
when you're working with music or artwork in general that repeats or oscillates, or pieces of technology that do those things, you know, when you were doing your first work with like tape loops or analog technologies, or with performers, regardless of the amount of precision, there's always going to be change and degradation, right?
Always going to be what?
There's always going to be change and degradation, either through the
Pain and degradation?
change. Sorry,
Not pain, change.
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 Yes,
And
Degradation.
degradation.
Yeah.
I got the first part wrong.
Yeah. Sorry.
Second part I got
Pain
right.
and degradation.
Right? Like a tape loop will degrade, or a performer will play things differently, right?
The performer will do what?
Will play things slightly differently each time.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're dealing with robotics. That's a
Right.
different field of endeavor.
So that's sort of my question, if you could reflect on whether you think when you're composing music that intentionally repeats, how that works, whether it's based on the repetition or based on the how integral the degradation or the change in the technology or the performer is. So if you're working digitally, that's not going to happen, right? Is that unclear?
I never quite thought of it that way.
Basically, if you could reflect on repetition on analog versus digital technologies.
Well, first of all, I haven't really done any digital repetition. I've used I use a Mac when I'm composing, where you use a Mac for, a lot of you use it for word processing. And how many composers here? How many of you use some kind of music software for notation? So you can see there's a lot of addicts around. You know, it's a widespread disease. But that's not to achieve if you wanted to note one of the biggest differences between what I did in 1967 and what I've been doing in the last 10 years or 20 years, you'd say, well, there's much less repetition now than there used to be. In drumming, it's an hour long, and it's a 20-page score. Double sextet is about 21 minutes, and it's about a 200-page score. So I've moved away from that way of working, not because I didn't like it, but because I just was drawn to do something differently. But I think in the answer to, I think what you're asking is that we're all analog. The world that I worked in with the tape loops was, you know, physical stuff. And the material on the recordings were people, as I explained earlier. And then I felt the need, personally, to do that with people and get rid of even that part of a machine reality. Not because it was bad, it was great, but because I felt, well, if it's just that, then it's sort of a gimmick. But if it becomes, but I know what the principle is like a cannon or around. It is like row, row, row your boat. Only you start together, and instead of we start together and we sort of slide apart. But it's the same principle. Same two things in different positions in time. So I felt if I couldn't make that decision, that movement to working with people, then I just couldn't work with tape the rest. The prospect of working with tape, analog tape, the rest of my life would have been impossible.
That's a really good answer. Thank you.
Okay, so we're wrapping up here. I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's a great crowd here tonight, and I want everybody to give it up for Art Buds, Steve Reich, and Michael Snow.